I found out my husband had another family, another woman, 2 children, a whole life running beside ours while I thought we were building a future together. And what hurts even more is that he wasn't only lying to me, he was getting ready to leave me with nothing. My name is Danielle. I'm 28 years old and I live in Chicago. A few months ago, I thought my life was ordinary in the best possible way. I had a stable job in HR at a tech company, a small apartment in Lincoln Park, and a husband I believed I could trust. My life wasn't glamorous, but it felt solid, predictable, safe. That was enough for me. I married Michael 3 years ago. When we met, he seemed like the kind of man who had everything under control. He worked for a financial consulting firm downtown. He was calm, organized, and always knew what to say. He dressed well, spoke carefully, and made me feel like I could relax around him. At the time, that mattered a lot to me. I had spent most of my adult life taking care of myself, making practical decisions, working hard, and not expecting much from anyone. Being with him felt different. It felt like I had finally found a real partner. The first couple of years were good. Not perfect, but good. We laughed. We cooked together sometimes. We watched old movies on the couch. We talked about buying a bigger place one day. We talked about children too, in that vague, hopeful way married people sometimes do when they think they have time. Our apartment was in my name. When we bought it, Michael told me his credit was tied up because of some old investment problems. He said it was temporary, just bad timing, and that putting the apartment in my name was the easiest way to move things forward. At the time, I didn't question it. We were married. I thought that meant we were building one life, not keeping score. I paid the down payment with money my grandmother had left me. Michael said we would split the mortgage and everything else from then on. I believed him. I worked Monday through Friday, usually from 8 to 5, though in reality it often stretched longer. I handled recruiting, onboarding, internal issues, and all the little emergencies people in HR are expected to solve quietly. It was busy, but I liked it. I liked being useful. I liked knowing where I stood. Michael left for work around the same time I did, but he almost always came home much later than I did. At first, I didn't think much of it. He worked in consulting. Long hours made sense. Client dinners made sense. Last-minute meetings made sense. Everything about his schedule sounded reasonable when he explained it, and because I loved him, I accepted those explanations without pushing. But about 6 months before everything fell apart, something changed. It wasn't one big moment. It was a lot of small ones. He still slept beside me. He still kissed me goodbye in the morning. He still asked if I wanted coffee before he left. But emotionally, he felt far away. Like he was present out of habit, not because he was really with me. One Tuesday night, I came home exhausted after a planning meeting that had dragged on for hours. When I opened the apartment door, Michael was on the couch with his phone in his hand. The second he saw me, he locked the screen and set the phone face down on the coffee table. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "Long day?" "Yeah," he said. That was it. Usually, even when we were both tired, we had some kind of conversation. That night, he barely looked at me. I told him about the mess I had dealt with at work. He nodded without really listening. When I asked about his day, he gave me short answers and changed the subject. I tried not to overthink it. People get stressed. Marriage goes through quiet periods. Not every strange moment means something is wrong. That's what I told myself. Then it kept happening. He started taking calls in the bedroom with the door closed. If I walked in, he would end the call immediately or lower his voice and say it was a client. Some nights he came home so late that dinner was cold by the time he sat down. Other nights, he barely touched his food. One night, I made lasagna because it was his favorite. I thought maybe we just needed one calm evening together. "Are you okay?" I asked while we ate. He looked up. "Why?" "You seem distracted. And tired. More than usual." He rubbed his face. "Work is a mess right now, Danny. A lot of pressure. We're closing some big contracts." "We could take a weekend away," I said. "Nothing big. Just get out of the city for a day or two." "Not now," he said. "Maybe when things settle down." Things never settled down. A few days later, I woke up in the middle of the night and reached across the bed. He wasn't there. I checked the time. A little after 3 in the morning. I found him in the living room with his laptop open. The room was dark except for the glow from the screen. The second he heard me, he shut the laptop too fast, like he'd been caught doing something private. "What are you doing?" I asked. He let out a breath. "I couldn't sleep. I'm just checking work emails." "At 3 in the morning?" He gave me a tired look. "Yeah, it's that kind of week." I wanted to ask more. I wanted to ask why he looked nervous instead of tired, but I didn't. I told him to come back to bed when he was done, and I went back to the bedroom. He never came back. When I woke up in the morning, he was asleep on the couch, still wearing the same clothes. Around the same time, he started talking a lot more about money. "We need to save more. Things are tight. Now isn't the time to spend on anything unnecessary." I listened. I cut back. I canceled my gym membership and started running outside instead. I stopped buying little things for myself. I stopped suggesting dinners out. I told myself it was temporary, that we were being responsible, that this was what building a future looked like. But even after all that, he always said there was nothing left over at the end of the month. "Where's the money going?" I asked him once. He shrugged. "Bills, taxes, the car, normal stuff." It was always a vague answer. Never enough detail to really understand, but just enough to end the conversation. By then I felt lonely in my own marriage, though I hated admitting it. I would get home, shower, make dinner, and wait. Sometimes I watched the clock without meaning to. 7:30, 8:15, 9. On weekends, he often said he had work to catch up on, so he would leave for hours and come back with the same tired voice and the same excuse. I told myself it was a phase. Then, his mother got sick. It happened on a Thursday morning. I was in a meeting at work when my phone vibrated. I saw Michael's name on the screen and answered right away because he almost never called me during office hours. "Danny," he said, and his voice sounded tight. "It's my mom. She collapsed at home. They took her to the hospital." My chair scraped loudly against the floor as I stood up. "Which hospital?" "Northwestern Memorial." "I'm on my way." His mother, Margaret, was 62. She was not a warm woman, but she was strong, quiet, self-contained, practical. The kind of person who dealt with pain privately. I had never seen her fragile. The idea of her collapsing at home shook me immediately. By the time I got to the hospital, Michael was already there in the waiting area. He looked pale, but not emotional. He was sitting hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When he saw me, he stood up. "What did they say?" I asked. He swallowed. "They think it's cancer. Pancreatic." I felt cold all over. We waited a long time before a doctor came to speak to us. He was young and looked exhausted in the way doctors often do when they've had to say hard things too many times in one day. He didn't waste words. The cancer was advanced. It had already spread. There wasn't much they could do except keep her comfortable. "How long?" Michael asked. The doctor hesitated. "It's hard to say exactly. Days, maybe a week." Margaret was moved to a room later that evening. When we went in, I barely recognized her. She had lost weight. Her skin had a yellow cast to it, and her face looked smaller somehow, like pain had slowly worn her down. Even so, when she saw us, she tried to smile. "You didn't have to rush over like this," she told me. "Of course I did," I said, pulling a chair closer to the bed. Michael stood beside me for a few minutes, asked the doctor a few practical questions, checked his phone twice, and then looked at his watch. "I need to head back for a while," he said. "There's something I can't miss." I turned to him. "Now?" He exhaled sharply. "Danny, I'll come back later." His mother was lying in a hospital bed with only days to live, and he was talking about work. He kissed her forehead, told her to rest, and left. I stayed. At first, I stayed because someone needed to be there. Then I stayed because Margaret clearly did better when someone was sitting with her. And after that, I stayed because I couldn't stand the idea of her being alone. Over the next several days, that became my routine. I left work, took the train to the hospital, and sat with her until visiting hours ended. Sometimes I read to her. Sometimes I adjusted her blanket or helped her drink water. Sometimes we just sat in silence. Michael came and went. He always had a reason. A client call. A late meeting. An urgent problem. He stayed 20 minutes, 30 if I was lucky, then left again with the same tired apology and the same promise to come back later. Margaret noticed. One evening, after he had left early again, she stared at the door for a few seconds and then looked at me. "He's always been like this," she said quietly. "He runs from anything he doesn't want to feel." I didn't answer right away. "He's scared," I said finally. She gave me a look I couldn't fully read. Maybe pity, maybe regret, maybe both. A few days later, the nurse told us Margaret was getting close to the end. By then, she was sleeping most of the time. When she woke up, she drifted in and out. Some moments she knew exactly where she was. Other moments she was confused and talked about things from years ago. That Monday afternoon, a doctor told me it would probably happen within hours. I called Michael at work. "You need to come now," I said. He was quiet for a second. "I'm in the middle of something." "Your mother is dying," I said, and I don't think I had ever sounded colder in my life. "Come now." He arrived a little over an hour later. We sat on either side of her bed while the light faded outside the hospital window. Her breathing had changed by then. Slower. Uneven. The kind of breathing that makes everyone in the room aware that time is running out. A little before 8, Michael checked his watch. I stared at him in disbelief. "Please don't tell me you're leaving." He looked miserable, but not for the reason he should have. "I have one call I really can't miss," he said. I felt something harden inside me. "This is your mother." He pressed his lips together and looked at the bed. "I'll come back right after." He left anyway. I stayed alone with Margaret. The room was dim and very still. I could hear voices in the hallway, the quiet movement of nurses, the soft hum of hospital machines. I sat close to her and held her hand, even though it had gone cold. It was close to 9 when she opened her eyes. For the first time in days, she looked completely clear. Not confused. Not drifting. Fully present. "Danielle," she said. I leaned in immediately. "I'm here." She tightened her fingers around mine with surprising strength. "I need you to listen to me." Something in her tone made my heart start pounding. "Okay," I said. "I'm listening." She glanced toward the door, then back at me. "My son is not who you think he is." A chill went through me. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She took a slow breath, as if even speaking was costing her effort. "I should have told you sooner." "Margaret, told me what?" "If you want the truth about Michael, go to Grant Park on Friday at 4 in the afternoon." I stared at her. "What?" "Go alone," she whispered. "Dress so he won't recognize you, and don't let him see you." None of it made sense. "Why? What am I supposed to see?" She squeezed my hand harder. "Promise me you'll go." I hesitated for 1 second, maybe 2. Then I said, "I promise." She closed her eyes briefly, as if that answer had taken the last bit of strength she had. When she opened them again, they were already losing focus. "In disguise," she murmured. "He can't know." "Margaret," I said, my voice shaking now, "please tell me what's there." But the clear moment was slipping away. Her grip loosened. I called the nurse, who came in quickly, checked her, adjusted her medication, and spoke to me in a soft voice I barely heard. I was still staring at Margaret, still hearing the words over and over in my head. Grant Park. Friday. 4 o'clock. My son is not who you think he is. Michael came back later that night. He sat beside the bed and cried quietly when he saw how weak she was. I didn't tell him what she had said. I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't even sure I understood it myself. Margaret died the next morning, just after 6. It happened quietly. 1 minute she was breathing. The next, she wasn't. The nurses came in. Then the doctor. There were papers to sign, soft voices, respectful steps. All the routine things that happen around a death while the people who love that person are still trying to understand that they're gone. Michael cried hard then. Truly hard. I held him because I didn't know what else to do. But even while he was shaking in my arms, part of me was somewhere else entirely. Grant Park. Friday, 4 o'clock. At the funeral on Thursday, he asked me a question that stayed with me. We had just gotten home. He was sitting on the couch, looking drained, his tie loose, his face gray with exhaustion. He stared at the floor for a long time before speaking. "Did she say anything to you at the end?" he asked. My whole body went still. I kept my voice careful. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, but it looked forced. "Anything she wanted me to know? Anything important?" I watched him for a second. I could have told him then. I could have repeated every word, but something about the way he asked made me stop. It wasn't grief I heard in his voice. It was concern. The kind of concern that comes when someone is afraid another person said too much. So I lied. "She said she loved you." He looked down and nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "That's good." That night, I lay in bed beside him and stared at the ceiling for hours. Friday was the next day, and no matter how much I tried to reason with myself, I already knew I was going to go. The next 2 days felt unreal. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat through meetings. I nodded when people spoke to me, but none of it reached me. My body was there, doing what it always did, while my mind kept circling the same words. Grant Park. Friday. 4 o'clock. Several times I almost convinced myself not to go. Margaret had been very sick. Maybe she had been confused. Maybe she had mixed up memories, names, times. Maybe there was nothing to see. Maybe I was about to humiliate myself by hiding in a park because of something a dying woman said in her final hours. But deep down, I didn't believe that. She had looked me straight in the eye when she said it. She had been clear, deliberate, urgent. So on Friday afternoon, I left work early. I told my team I wasn't feeling well and headed home first. I changed out of my office clothes and put on old jeans, a gray sweatshirt, running shoes, and a baseball cap. I pulled my hair back low and wore large sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. I looked strange, but not strange enough to draw attention. Just like someone trying to get through a tired Friday afternoon unnoticed. Grant Park was busy when I got there. People were out walking, pushing strollers, jogging, talking on benches, taking pictures near the lake. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was cold, and the trees had already started losing their leaves. It was one of those gray Chicago afternoons that makes the whole city feel restless. I got there 10 minutes early and found a bench where I could see a wide stretch of the path near a small playground. At first, I felt ridiculous. I sat there pretending to check my phone while my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every man in a dark coat made me sit up a little straighter. Every passing minute made me feel more foolish. 4 o'clock came and went. Nothing. At 4:05, I almost stood up to leave. At 4:10, I saw Michael. He was walking quickly from the south end of the path, carrying his briefcase, wearing the same navy suit he had left the house in that morning. I froze. He stopped near the playground and looked around once, not nervously exactly, but like someone waiting for someone he expected to see. Then a woman approached him. She was blonde, around my age, maybe a little older, dressed casually in jeans and a dark jacket. She was pushing a stroller. Beside her was a little boy, maybe 3 years old, holding onto the side of it as he walked. The boy looked up, saw Michael, and shouted, "Daddy!" I stopped breathing. That's the only way I can explain it. My body kept working, but for 1 second everything inside me went still. The boy ran straight to him. Michael bent down, lifted him easily, and kissed the side of his face. The woman stepped closer and Michael kissed her too. Not awkwardly, not like two people trying to hide something. It was the kind of kiss built from familiarity. Routine. They had done that before. Many times. I sat completely still on that bench, staring at them. Michael took the stroller from her and looked down at the baby inside. I couldn't see clearly from that distance, but I saw him smile. Not the distracted half-smile he had been giving me for months. A real one. Warm. Easy. Unforced. Then the four of them started walking together. Like a family. Because they were one. I don't know how long I sat there before I stood up. Maybe 30 seconds. Maybe 2 full minutes. Time felt broken. My hands were shaking. My mouth had gone dry. I remember standing too fast and feeling the ground tilt under me. I turned and walked away before they could see me. I didn't run. I wanted to, but I didn't. I just walked fast, then faster, until I reached a trash can near the edge of the path and had to brace both hands against it because I thought I might be sick. My husband had another family. Not an affair. Not one stupid mistake. A family. A woman. A little boy. A baby. A life so real and established that there was no room for denial, no room for misunderstanding, no room for me to tell myself I had seen something out of context. Margaret had known. That thought hit me almost as hard as the rest of it. She had known, and she had tried to warn me before she died. I stayed near the edge of the park for several more minutes, hidden behind a line of trees trying to think. But there was no thinking yet. Only shock. Every question came at once. How long had this been going on? Had he been with her before me? During me? The whole time? Did she know he was married? Were the late nights really with her? Was that where the money had been going? I finally forced myself to look back once. They were still there, farther away now. Michael had the little boy on his shoulders. The woman was walking beside him with one hand on the stroller. They looked ordinary. That was the part that made it worse. They looked comfortable, established. Like this was just Friday. I left the park and wandered for a long time before I found my way home. I barely remember the trip back. I know I took the train. I know I sat by the window and stared at nothing while the city moved around me. I know that by the time I got off, it was getting dark. When I got home, I went straight into the shower. I stood under hot water until the bathroom mirror fogged and my skin turned red. But it didn't help. I could still see him lifting that child. I could still hear that little voice saying, "Daddy." I sat on the couch in silence until Michael came home. It was after 9. He walked in, loosened his tie, and gave me the same tired look he had given me so many times before. "Long day," he said. I looked at him and had to force every muscle in my face to stay calm. "Me too," I said. He asked if I had eaten. I said yes, even though I hadn't. He talked a little about work, about a report, about a client call, and I just watched him. Really watched him. Every word felt false. Every casual movement made my skin crawl. That night, lying beside him in bed, I didn't sleep at all. I stared into the dark and listened to him breathe. I wanted to wake him up and scream at him. I wanted to turn on the light and demand names, dates, explanations. I wanted to ask him how he had touched me with the same hands he used to hold those children. I wanted to ask him whether he had ever loved me at all. But I didn't do any of that. Because sometime between midnight and sunrise, another thought pushed through the pain. I needed to know everything before I said a word. Not one piece of it. All of it. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was not going to confront him until I understood exactly what he had done. At breakfast, he was in a surprisingly good mood. He made toast. He checked his phone and smiled at something on the screen. Then he looked at me. "You okay?" he asked. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep well." "Me neither," he said lightly, though he looked perfectly rested. "I may need to go in for a few hours tomorrow too. We're behind on some things." "Of course you are," I thought. Out loud, I just said, "Okay." He left the apartment a little after 7:30. I waited 15 minutes, then called my office and said I had a stomach bug and needed to work from home for a few days. After that, I opened my laptop and started digging. At first, I didn't even know where to begin, so I started with what I knew: our joint account. That account looked normal at a glance. Household bills, grocery charges, utility payments, regular transfers. Nothing there explained a second apartment, 2 children, and years of deception. Then I remembered something Michael had said more than once over the years. He had a separate account from before we got married. Personal money, old investments. Nothing for me to worry about. At the time, I had accepted that. Now I didn't. Michael had a habit of staying logged into things on his laptop at home. Not because he trusted me, I think, but because it never crossed his mind that I would ever look. Until then, I never had. It took me more than an hour to find what I needed. A bank notification in his email. Then another. Then a statement attached as a PDF. When I opened it, I felt the blood drain from my face. The balance was just over $50,000. I stared at the number for a long time. 50,000. All those talks about being careful. All those months of hearing that money was tight. All the small things I had denied myself because we were supposedly trying to be responsible. And all the while, he had that much money sitting in a hidden account. I kept searching. That was when I noticed the name. The statements were addressed to Michael T. Johnson. For a second, I thought I had opened someone else's records by mistake. Then I understood. Johnson was Margaret's maiden name. He had used a version of his own name to create distance without creating a completely fake identity. Not fake enough to be obvious, just different enough to hide. I searched further and found transfer records, regular payments, and then something that made my hands start shaking again. Lease documents. An apartment in Pilsen. 2 bedrooms. The lease was in the name of Michael T. Johnson. I clicked through the file twice just to be sure I was reading it correctly. Address, rent amount, start date, signature. All real. I sat back in my chair and pressed both hands over my mouth. There it was. The place where he had been living his other life. At that point, a smarter person might have stopped, backed up every file and taken a breath. I couldn't. I needed more. So I kept going. There were grocery receipts sent by email, pharmacy purchases, baby supplies, children's clothes, utility bills for the Pilsen apartment, and threaded between those records were messages from a real estate contact in Evanston about a small rental property also linked to Michael T. Johnson. A property. He owned a property I knew nothing about. By then, I was no longer crying. I was too focused. The more I found, the calmer I became. Not calmer in a healthy way. Calmer in the way people do when something inside them hardens. That afternoon, I created a private folder on my laptop and copied everything into it. Statements, lease papers, emails, receipts, screenshots. I saved backups to a flash drive too. I didn't trust myself to leave anything in one place. Michael came home around 10 that night. He apologized for being late. He blamed work. He kissed my forehead and asked if I had taken medicine for my stomach. I looked him in the eye and said, yes. I hated how easy it was for him. The next morning, after he left, I went back to Grant Park. Same casual clothes, same cap, same sunglasses. I didn't know if he would be there again because Margaret had only mentioned Friday, but I wanted more than digital proof. I wanted proof no one could explain away. I waited almost an hour before I saw them. This time, I stayed hidden and used my phone. Michael arrived first. A few minutes later, the woman came with both children. The little boy ran to him again. The baby, strapped into the stroller, reached for him when he leaned down. He lifted the baby, kissed the top of that tiny head, and stood there smiling while the woman adjusted the blanket around the stroller. I took photo after photo. Not enough to get close. Enough to show the truth. Then I watched him hand her a large envelope. Money, I assumed. After that, he pulled out several papers and pointed to something on the top page while she listened. They talked seriously for a few minutes, then went back to looking like a happy family. By the time I left the park, I understood one thing very clearly. This was not a secret relationship that had gotten out of hand. This was a second life, built carefully over time. And if he had hidden this much from me already, there was probably more. A lot more. That was the moment I realized I couldn't handle it alone. I needed help. Real help. And I knew exactly where I had to go next. The first person I called was a private investigator. I did it from a coffee shop across town because I didn't want any part of that search showing up on our home Wi-Fi, our shared devices, or anything else Michael might somehow see later. Maybe that sounds paranoid, but by then I had stopped assuming I knew what he was capable of. The investigator's name was Robert Chen. He had strong reviews, years of experience, and a short website that gave me exactly the impression I wanted. Discreet, practical, no unnecessary talk. We met that same afternoon. He was in his 50s, calm, neatly dressed, and so steady in the way he listened that I found myself trusting him almost immediately. "What exactly do you need?" he asked after I explained the basics. I took a breath. "I need to know everything my husband is hiding, where he goes, who he lives with, what money he has, whether there are properties, accounts, anything else connected to him that I don't know about." He nodded once. "Do you already have proof of another relationship?" "Yes," I said. "I have photos. I have a lease under another version of his name. I have hidden bank statements." "Good," he said. "That gives me something to build on." I slid my folder across the table. He looked through it carefully, not dramatically, just efficiently. Every now and then he asked a question. "How long have you been married?" 3 years. "Any children?" "No." "Do you know whether the woman knows about you?" "I don't know." "Do you believe he may try to move money quickly if he thinks you know?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes." That answer seemed to matter to him. He closed the folder and looked at me directly. "I can put together a full report," he said. "Activity, financial records where I can access them legally, property links, photographs, timelines. It will take about 2 weeks." "I don't want to wait that long," I said. "You won't." He named his fee. It was high enough to make me pause, but not high enough to make me say no. I had money set aside in an account that had nothing to do with Michael, savings I had never touched except for true emergencies. This counted. I paid the first half that day. After I left the coffee shop, I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. I should have felt frightened. Maybe part of me did. But stronger than the fear was something else. Relief. For the first time since Grant Park, I wasn't just reacting. I was doing something. Over the next several days, I kept pretending everything was normal at home. That was the hardest part. Every night, Michael came back with a version of the same tired story, and every night I had to listen without showing what I knew. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I sat beside him on the couch. I slept next to him. Inside, I was changing. I could feel it. The version of me that wanted a simple explanation, one ugly truth followed by tears and apologies, was disappearing. The more I learned, the less room there was for that kind of hope. One Wednesday, I left work early and waited near Michael's office downtown. I stood across the street in a coat and cap, trying to look like someone checking her phone between errands. At 5:15, he came out of the building, crossed toward the parking garage, got into his car, and drove west. I followed in a rideshare. Traffic was heavy, and the whole time I kept thinking I had become someone I didn't recognize. I had never followed anyone before. I had never hidden in parks or copied files or watched my husband from the back seat of a stranger's car. But there I was. Michael drove straight to Pilsen. He parked in front of a brick apartment building on a quiet block lined with narrow trees and old cars. He went inside without even looking around. A few minutes later, a light came on in a third-floor window. Then I saw 2 figures move past the blinds. One was him. The other was the woman. I sat there looking up at that window, my chest tight, until the driver gently asked whether I wanted to be dropped off there or kept waiting. "Home," I said. On the ride back, I stared out the window and thought about all the times I had defended him to myself, all the excuses I had made, all the lonely nights I had treated like temporary inconveniences in a normal marriage. That night, he got home after 10. He came in with his usual expression of tired annoyance and loosened his tie in the doorway. "Sorry," he said. "One thing after another today." I sat on the couch and looked at him. "I'm sure." He didn't notice anything strange in my tone. Or if he did, he ignored it. A few days later, Robert called. "I have enough for us to meet," he said. "Can you come this afternoon?" I said yes before he even finished. We met in the same coffee shop. This time, he handed me a thick envelope and waited while I went through the first few pages. There were photographs of Michael entering and leaving the Pilsen apartment on multiple days, sometimes during the week, sometimes on weekends, often carrying groceries, children's items, or bags that looked too personal to explain away. There was a clear timeline showing regular visits. There were records tying Michael T. Johnson directly to Michael through addresses, signatures, and linked financial activity. Then I reached the section with the woman's name. Jennifer Walsh, 30 years old, 2 children, a boy who had just turned 3, a daughter who was 18 months old. I read those lines twice, then a third time. The little girl was older than I had guessed from the stroller. It made no difference. The only thing that mattered was that both children were his. Robert had also connected Michael to a small rental property in Evanston. I noticed that immediately because I had already seen the address in the emails. A condo, purchased 2 years earlier under the Johnson name and currently being rented out. That income, combined with the hidden bank account and whatever else he was moving around, meant he had built a financial life I knew almost nothing about. Then I found the worst page in the entire packet. Travel confirmations, 4 airline tickets, Costa Rica, departure 6 weeks away. Michael, Jennifer, both children. I felt sick all over again. He was planning to leave, I said quietly. Robert didn't answer at first. Then he said, "That's what it looks like." I kept turning pages. There were also email exchanges with a real estate contact asking about valuation and possible sale timing for my apartment. My apartment, the one in my name, the one I had paid the down payment for with my grandmother's money. I looked up at Robert. "He can't sell it without me." "Not without your signature," he said, "but if he's bold enough, he may try to get it." I sat there with the envelope open in front of me and felt something inside me go very still. The affair had been devastating enough. The hidden money had made me furious. But this was worse. He wasn't just lying to me and using my life as cover while he built another one. He was planning an exit. A clean one. He had every intention of taking what he could, disappearing with them, and leaving me behind to sort through the wreckage on my own. I paid Robert the rest of what I owed him and took the envelope home. I cried that night. Really cried. Harder than I had since the day I saw him in the park. I cried for what I had lost. For how stupid I felt. For how long he had looked me in the eye and lied. For the fact that none of my memories felt clean anymore. Not the wedding. Not our talks about children. Not the nights I sat alone waiting for him. By morning, the crying was over. Not because I was healed. Because I was done being passive. That same day, I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney. Her name was Patricia Morrison. She came highly recommended for difficult divorce cases, especially the kind involving hidden assets and complicated financial records. She was expensive. I did not care. When I walked into her office, I carried everything with me. Robert's report, my screenshots, the copied statements, the lease, the photos from Grant Park, all of it organized in a box. Patricia was direct from the first minute. She was in her 40s, sharply dressed, with the kind of calm confidence that makes you sit up straighter without meaning to. "Tell me what's happening," she said. So I did. I told her about Margaret's warning, Grant Park, the hidden account, the apartment in Pilsen, the children, the Evanston rental, the travel plans, and the valuation emails about my apartment. She listened without interrupting, except to ask practical questions. "When did you buy the apartment?" "Shortly after we got married." "Whose name is on the deed?" "Mine." "Who paid the down payment?" "I did. It came from money my grandmother left me." "Do you have records for that?" "Yes." "Good." She spent a long time going through the documents. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed slightly. Not softer exactly, more focused. "You have a strong case," she said. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "What do I do first?" "We move before he knows you know." That sentence changed everything. She explained it clearly. If Michael suspected I had found out, he could start moving money faster, deleting records, trying to pressure me into signing something, or simply leaving sooner than planned. The advantage I had was surprise, and I could not waste it. "So we don't confront him yet," she said. "Not until protections are in place." "What protections?" "We file for immediate financial restraints tied to the divorce action and the evidence of concealed assets. We document the hidden accounts, the rental property, the second residence, and the travel plans. We also make it very clear that the apartment is in your name and that there is a risk he may attempt to manipulate a transfer or sale. Can he touch any of it once that happens? Not easily, she said. And if he tries, it gets worse for him. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like safety. Not peace, not relief, but structure. A path. Patricia told me to gather every document connected to the apartment, my inheritance from my grandmother, our joint account, and anything else that showed my financial contribution. She also told me something else. Do not sign anything he gives you, she said. Nothing. Not tax forms, not refinancing papers, not updates for the bank. Nothing at all without showing me first. I won't. Good, she said. Men like this often get careless when they think they're almost out. That line stayed with me. And she was right. 3 nights later, Michael came home carrying an envelope. I was in the kitchen washing lettuce for dinner when he set it on the counter beside me. Can you sign a few things for me? He asked casually. Just paperwork for taxes and the mortgage file. Nothing major. I dried my hands and opened the envelope right there. The first page looked ordinary enough. The second too. The third was not. Buried between routine-looking forms was a power of attorney authorizing him to act on my behalf in a property transaction. I read it twice, slowly, because I almost couldn't believe he had actually tried it. He was standing just a few feet away, opening the fridge like this was any normal evening. I forced my face to stay neutral. I'll read these tonight, I said. He looked at me quickly. The accountant needs them tomorrow. Then the accountant can wait until I've gone through them properly. It's all standard. Then reading it won't be a problem. For 1 second, the room went very quiet. He closed the fridge door and turned to me. His expression was still controlled, but I could see the irritation underneath. Danny, it's paperwork. That's all. And I'm still reading it. He held my gaze for another second, then smiled in that tight way people do when they're forcing themselves not to push harder. Fine, he said. Tomorrow is fine. The next morning, I took the envelope straight to Patricia. She skimmed the power of attorney and gave a short, humorless laugh. He tried to hide this among tax forms? Yes. She set the papers down carefully. That helps us? How? It shows intent. I felt a wave of anger so sharp I had to look away. He was really going to do it, I said. He was really going to take everything he could. Yes, Patricia said. He was. That afternoon, she filed the last of what she needed. By then, the strategy was clear. We would finish preparing the divorce papers. We would lock down what we could. And when everything was ready, I would confront him once, with all of it already in motion. No arguments in the middle. No begging. No room for him to get ahead of me. I went home that evening and told Michael there had been errors in the forms and that I wanted corrected copies before I signed anything. He was visibly annoyed. He tried to hide it, but I saw the flicker in his face, the way his jaw tightened. Fine, he said. I'll take care of it. I nodded and went back to making dinner. Inside, I was counting down, not to save my marriage, to end it. The days before the confrontation were some of the strangest of my life. On the outside, everything looked normal. I got up, got dressed, went to work, answered questions, came home, made dinner, sat through evenings on the couch, and listened to Michael talk about a life that I now knew was mostly fiction. He still blamed late nights on work. He still glanced at his phone with a private smile he thought I didn't notice. He still moved through our apartment as if it belonged to him. Inside, I was preparing to end all of it. Patricia moved quickly. She filed the initial divorce action and the emergency requests tied to the hidden assets, the separate residence, and the risk that Michael might try to move money or pressure me into signing away property. She explained every step in plain language and made sure I understood what was realistic and what would take more time. Some things happen fast, she told me. Some things take weeks or months. But the important part is that once this starts, he can't pretend none of this exists. That mattered to me more than I can explain. I didn't need instant justice. I needed the truth to stop being private. At Patricia's direction, I moved my paycheck from our joint account to my personal one and transferred out the portion of the balance that clearly came from my own earnings. I copied every financial record I could access and gave her a full set. I also packed a small overnight bag and left it in my trunk in case I needed space after the confrontation. I was done underestimating him. By then, Michael seemed restless. Maybe he sensed something had shifted. Maybe he was just feeling pressure from the life he was trying and failing to control. Whatever the reason, he was more distracted than usual. He took calls in the hallway. He checked his phone constantly. Twice I walked into the room and watched him turn the screen over before I got close enough to see anything. On Friday night, he came home early for once. I was sitting on the couch with a book in my lap, not reading a word of it, when he sat down across from me and looked at me with unusual seriousness. "We should talk," he said. My heart kicked hard once against my ribs. "About what?" "About us." I said nothing. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "I know I've been distant. I know work has taken over everything lately, but I'm trying to fix things for us. Build something better." The calm it took not to react almost impressed me. "For us?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "For our future." There it was again. Our future. As if he hadn't already built another one. He kept talking, and I let him. He said we needed a fresh start. He said this apartment was too small long-term. He said maybe we should think seriously about selling it and buying something else, something better, somewhere quieter, maybe even outside the city. Every word felt rehearsed, careful. He was still trying to move me toward the decision he wanted, still trying to make me believe we were planning a life together. I looked down at my book, and then back at him. "It's a big decision," I said. "I need time." He searched my face. "Time for what?" "To think clearly." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Okay." That was on Friday. By Monday, everything was ready. Patricia called me just after lunch. "The filing is in," she said. "The temporary restraints are in place. He'll be served tomorrow morning at work unless you want to do the confrontation first tonight." "Tonight?" I said. There was a pause. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Then keep it simple," she said. "Do not debate the whole history of your marriage. Do not let him drag you into circles. State what you know. Tell him what has already been filed. If he becomes aggressive, you leave immediately and call me." "I understand." When I hung up, my hands were cold. I looked around my office at the ordinary beige walls, the muted hum of printers, the little stack of resumes on my desk, and I thought, this is the last day of this version of my life. I left work on time and went straight home. I cleaned the apartment. I don't know why that felt important, but it did. I folded the blanket on the couch, wiped the counters, put away shoes by the door, washed the dishes already in the sink. Maybe I needed the space to feel like mine before I took my marriage apart inside it. Then I made dinner. Not because I wanted to do something kind for him, because I wanted one final normal evening before the truth hit. I cooked steak, roasted potatoes, and a salad. I opened a bottle of wine and set the table properly, with cloth napkins and candles we hadn't used in months. Everything looked calm, thoughtful, familiar. At 7:20, he texted that he was on his way. At 7:30, he walked in carrying flowers. Red roses. I almost laughed. Lilies had always been my favorite. He had never remembered that. "For you," he said. "Thanks," I said, and put them in water anyway. He showered while I plated the food. I could hear the water running upstairs while I stood in the kitchen and looked at the table we had eaten at 100 times before. My stomach was tight, but my mind was clear. This was not a fight. This was the end of one. When he came downstairs, he smiled at the setup. "Wow," he said. "What's all this?" "Dinner," I said. We ate quietly for a few minutes. He seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. He talked about his day, about some contract issue at work, about traffic, about nothing important. I nodded when needed and let him fill the silence. Then, when he took another sip of wine and looked up at me, I put my fork down. "We need to talk." Something in my voice changed the whole room. He set his glass down more carefully than before. Okay. I looked straight at him. I know about Jennifer. He went completely still. For half a second, he didn't even blink. Then he gave a short, confused shake of his head. What? I know about Jennifer. I repeated. I know about the apartment in Pilsen. I know about the children. I know about the bank account under Michael T. Johnson. I know about the property in Evanston. And I know about the tickets to Costa Rica. The color drained out of his face so fast it was almost shocking. Danny. No, I said. You don't get to interrupt me yet. He stared at me, and I watched the exact moment panic replaced denial. His eyes moved across my face, searching for some sign that this was a bluff. It wasn't. I stood up, went into the bedroom, brought back the box of documents, and set it on the table between us. I have photographs, I said. I have financial records. I have lease papers. I have the travel confirmations. I have the messages about selling this apartment. I have enough to prove every word I'm saying. He looked down at the box and then back at me. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Finally, he said, How long have you known? Long enough. He sat back slowly in his chair and ran a hand over his mouth. Danny, I can explain. I had expected him to say that. Maybe every liar says that when the room finally runs out of lies. Then explain. He looked down at the table. It started before you, he said quietly. I knew Jennifer before I met you. I said nothing. She got pregnant, he continued. Things between us were already bad. We weren't really together the way you think. Then I met you, and everything changed. I felt disgust rise in me so hard I had to steady my hands at my sides. Don't do that, I said. Don't try to make this sound romantic. His eyes snapped up to mine, then away again. I'm not, he said. I'm telling you what happened. No, I said. You're telling me the version that makes you look less deliberate. Keep going. He swallowed. I didn't know how to end it once the baby was born. The first baby, I said. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. And the second one? He didn't answer. The silence between us said enough. I nodded slowly. So while you were sleeping in my bed, telling me we were trying to save money for our future, you were still with her, still building another family. It wasn't that simple? I laughed once, but there was nothing amused in it. It was exactly that simple. He stood up then, restless, agitated, and started pacing beside the table. I never meant for it to get this far. But it did. I was trying to manage it. You were managing me, I said. You were managing what I knew, what I didn't know, what I paid for, what I questioned, and what I was supposed to sign. At that, he stopped moving. His eyes flicked to the box again. You saw those papers? Yes, I said. I read them. It wasn't what you think. It was a power of attorney hidden between routine forms. I know exactly what it was. He opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time that night, he looked cornered in a way that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with logistics. He wasn't trying to fix our marriage. He was trying to calculate what I could prove and what would happen next. So I told him. Everything has already started, I said. The divorce filing is in motion. My attorney has the records. Temporary financial restraints have been put in place. You do not get to move money around or pretend none of this happened. He stared at me. You filed already? Yes. His face changed again, this time from panic to anger. You went behind my back? I almost couldn't believe what I had heard. Behind your back? His jaw tightened. You should have talked to me first. I stepped closer to the table. For 3 years, you lied to me every day. You had another home, another woman, 2 children, hidden money, hidden property, and plans to leave the country. And you think the problem here is that I spoke to a lawyer before I spoke to you? He didn't answer. He just stood there breathing too hard, all pretense finally gone. Then, more quietly, he said, I wasn't going to leave you with nothing. I looked at him for a long moment. You were trying to get legal control over an apartment that is in my name. I was desperate. That is not an explanation. He put both hands on the back of his chair and bowed his head. Jennifer was pressuring me, he said. She wanted me there full time. She wanted us to be a real family. You already were one. No, he said sharply. Not completely. The words landed between us and stayed there. Not completely. Meaning I was what? The cover story? The financial support? The safe version of his life? I suddenly felt very tired, not emotional, not confused, just deeply, cleanly finished. I want you out of this apartment, I said. His head came up. Tonight? Yes. Where am I supposed to go? That is not my problem. He stared at me as if I had become someone unfamiliar. Maybe I had. Danny, he said, and for the first time there was something close to pleading in his voice. Please, we don't have to decide everything tonight. I already have. He took one step toward me. I stepped back. Don't, I said. He stopped. The papers will reach you tomorrow, I said. You can speak to your lawyer. From this point on, we handle this formally. His face hardened. You really want to do this in court? I really want to end a marriage built on lies. We looked at each other across the table that had held our dinner only minutes earlier. The candles were still burning. The wine glasses were still half full, and there was nothing left to save. I picked up my keys and my bag. I'm staying elsewhere tonight, I said. When I come back tomorrow, I expect you to be gone. You can't throw me out like this. It's my apartment. He didn't answer because he knew I was right. I went to the door, opened it, and looked back once. He was still standing by the table, pale, stunned, surrounded by the documents that had ended his double life. I left without another word. The night air outside was cold enough to sting. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, shaking. Not from fear, but from the force of everything I had been holding in for weeks. Then I got into my car, locked the doors, and called Patricia. It's done, I said. There was a pause on the line. How did it go? He knows. He knows I know everything. And you're safe? Yes. Good, she said. Go somewhere you can sleep. Tomorrow we handle the rest. I hung up and drove to my friend Alyssa's apartment across town. She opened the door in sweatpants, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug before I even said a word. I didn't cry right away. I waited until she sat me down on her couch with a glass of water and a blanket, and said, very softly, You can stop holding it together now. Then I cried. Not because I wanted him back. Not because I doubted what I had done, but because endings hurt, even when they are necessary. And because that was the first night I fully accepted something I had been resisting for a long time. The marriage I thought I had was never real. What came next would have to be. The next morning, Michael was served at work. By then, he had already left the apartment. He took clothes, toiletries, his laptop, and a few other things, but not much else. When I got home that evening, the place looked almost the same. That somehow made it stranger. His shoes were gone from the hallway. A few hangers were missing from the closet. The bathroom shelf had an empty space where his razor used to be. Small absences, sharp ones. There was a message waiting for me. I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen like this. I stared at it for a long time and then deleted it. There was no version of this that happened cleanly. The following weeks were exhausting. There were calls with Patricia, document requests, formal responses from Michael's attorney, account reviews, questions about timelines, questions about money, questions about what belonged to whom. Some things moved quickly. Other things didn't. That part was important. I had wanted the truth exposed, but real legal processes are slower and less dramatic than people imagine. There were no instant victories, just paperwork, strategy, evidence, and patience. Still, the facts were on my side. The apartment remained mine. The money I had contributed was clearly documented. The hidden assets mattered. The second residence mattered. The attempt to get me to sign the power of attorney mattered. And the travel plans, along with the concealed finances, helped establish intent in a way Michael's side couldn't easily explain away. He tried, of course. Through his attorney, he shifted between excuses. He had been overwhelmed. He had made mistakes. He had not intended financial harm. He had wanted to resolve things privately. I heard all of that and felt nothing. By then I was too far into the truth to be moved by polished language. Jennifer found out he was married. I did not contact her myself. I thought about it more than once, especially in the beginning, when anger was still sitting close to the surface. But in the end, I chose not to. The truth was already moving toward her whether I helped it or not. My priority was protecting myself, my home, and my future. I had spent enough time cleaning up the damage he caused. I was not going to take responsibility for managing the fallout in his other life too. From what I later heard through legal conversations and mutual connections, she did not take the news well. I wasn't surprised. Whatever she knew, she clearly did not know everything. The divorce was finalized a few months later. Not instantly, not perfectly, but clearly. I kept the apartment. That part was never really in doubt once the records were in front of everyone. The down payment had come from my inheritance, the deed was in my name, and his attempt to get control over the property only strengthened my position. The hidden funds were dealt with through the settlement process. The Evanston property had to be addressed too. I wanted no emotional attachment to anything connected to him, so once the division was settled, I stepped away from it completely. I didn't want a symbolic victory, I wanted a clean life. By the end of it, I had stability. More than that, I had clarity. Michael lost far more than he expected to. Money, obviously, credibility too. His double life did not stay neatly contained once lawyers, records, and timelines got involved. I'm not saying every part of his world collapsed overnight. It didn't. Real consequences are usually messier than that. But people saw him differently afterward, and some things can't be repaired once they're exposed. I did not feel sorry for him. Not once. That doesn't mean healing was simple. It wasn't. For the first couple of months, I moved through my own life like someone recovering from an accident. Everything worked, technically, but nothing felt natural. I would wake up and remember all over again. I would pass the couch and think of all the nights I had sat there waiting for him. I would open the closet and notice the gap where his clothes used to be and feel anger before I even finished my first cup of coffee. Some nights I cried. Some nights I was too tired even for that. I went back to therapy. I had gone briefly years before, after a difficult period in my early 20s, and I knew enough to understand that this was not the kind of pain I wanted to carry alone. This time, I found a therapist who helped me untangle more than the betrayal itself. We talked about trust, yes, but also about self-blame, hypervigilance, the shame of not seeing what now seems obvious, and the quiet ways women are trained to overlook their own discomfort in order to keep a relationship functioning. That helped me more than I can say. So did my friends. I had withdrawn from a lot of people during my marriage without fully realizing it. Not because Michael had demanded it directly, but because my life had slowly narrowed around his schedule, his stress, his excuses, his absences. Once things ended, the people who truly loved me showed up in ways I'll never forget. Alyssa came over with takeout and stayed late on weeknights when I couldn't stand the silence. My mother spent 2 weekends with me and never once said, "I told you so." A coworker quietly took extra work off my plate when she realized I was barely sleeping. Those things mattered. Healing did not come from one big breakthrough. It came from 100 small acts of care. Little by little, I started rebuilding my routines. I ran again, at first only short distances. My body felt heavy, and my mind wandered too much. But I kept going. The cold morning air helped. The motion helped. The discipline of putting on my shoes and moving forward, even when I didn't feel like it, helped. I changed the apartment too. Not all at once. Room by room. I took down the wedding photos. I moved furniture. I gave away the armchair he had insisted on buying, even though it never fit the room properly. I painted the living room a lighter color. I bought plants, new pillows, and a rug that made the space feel warmer. For the first time since we had moved in, the apartment actually looked like me. At work, I found my way back to myself faster than I expected. I stopped apologizing so much. I spoke more clearly in meetings. I asked for the promotion I had been hesitating to pursue, and I got it. That mattered too, not because a title can heal betrayal, but because pain had made me smaller for a while, and I was tired of shrinking. About 6 months after the confrontation, I found myself back at Grant Park. I wasn't there on purpose, not exactly. I had gone downtown for something else and ended up walking farther than I planned. By the time I realized where I was already standing near one of the paths that had changed my life. For a moment, I thought about turning around. Then I didn't. I walked in slowly. The park looked different in spring. Lighter, softer. The lake was bright under the afternoon sun, and families were spread across the grass and pathways. Children laughed near the same playground where I had once watched my husband pick up a little boy who called him Daddy. I found the bench where I had sat that day and stood beside it for a while before sitting down. I expected to feel everything again. Shock, rage, humiliation. Instead, what I felt was distance, not indifference. It still mattered. It always would. But the memory no longer owned me. I sat there and thought about Margaret, about the effort it must have taken for her to say what she said in those final hours, about the guilt she must have carried, about the fact that, in the end, she chose to tell me the truth even though it meant exposing her own son. I still don't know everything she knew or how long she had known it. Maybe she had only learned part of it recently. Maybe she had suspected for a long time and finally reached the point where she could no longer stay silent. Maybe she simply looked at me sitting beside her hospital bed day after day while her own son kept leaving, and realized I deserved better than the lie I was living in. I'll never know. What I do know is this. She gave me the chance to see the truth before it was too late. Without that warning, I might have signed those papers. I might have continued explaining away Michael's behavior until he had already taken what he wanted and disappeared into the life he was building behind my back. Instead, I saw him clearly, and once I did, I refused to look away. That changed everything. I sat on that bench for a long time, watching people pass, listening to the city move around me, and thinking about how strange survival can be. When you are in the middle of betrayal, it feels like the pain will define the rest of your life. It feels permanent. It feels bigger than you. But it isn't. Pain changes shape. It loosens. It stops being the center of everything. You do not forget what happened, but eventually the memory becomes part of your story instead of the whole story. That afternoon in the park, I understood something I had been working toward for months. Moving on is not the same as pretending it didn't hurt. It hurt deeply. It changed me, but it did not end me. I stood up from the bench and looked once toward the playground. Then I said, very quietly, "Thank you, Margaret." Not because she saved my marriage. She didn't. There was nothing there to save. But she saved me from staying blind inside it. I turned and walked out of the park without rushing. The city stretched ahead of me, loud and busy and ordinary. People passed me without a second glance. Cars moved through the intersections. Someone nearby was laughing into a phone. A bus sighed to a stop at the curb. Life was continuing, as it always does. And for the first time in a long time, I felt fully part of it again. Not as someone waiting, not as someone being deceived, not as someone trying to hold together a life that was already broken. Just as myself. My name is Danielle. I'm 28 years old. I live in Chicago. I'm an HR professional. I own my apartment. And I know now that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like paying attention. Sometimes it looks like gathering evidence. Sometimes it looks like walking away the moment the truth becomes clear. I don't know exactly what comes next. Maybe love again one day. Maybe not for a while. Maybe a bigger career move. Maybe travel. Maybe a life that turns out nothing like the one I once imagined, that no longer scares me, because now I know I can survive the collapse of something I trusted. I can rebuild. I can begin again. And this time, whatever I build will be honest.